Hi, I'm Blake Barrett from San Francisco. This is my submission for the Super Artistic AI art project. I knew from the beginning I wanted this project to some way incorporate color as the artistic expression. So I reached out to OpenAI. I filed an application to get access to the GPT-3 engine with the color project in mind. That was approved, and that was great. So then in reading the instructions on how to interact with the OpenAI API, playing around in their playground, just text chatting with the AI, it became immediately apparent that the AI didn't really understand color. If you ask it its favorite color, it will tell you, but if you ask it, what's a color that is a similar shade to or hue than, green or something, it would say, I don't have any concept of color, which got frustrating pretty quickly when you're trying to do a project around color. So I thought, okay, let's take a step back a bit. Let's put a pin on the idea of the color thing, and let's just move on to something a little easier. And I thought, okay, well, what can it do? So, well, what's the mathematical opposite of blue? And it returned orange. I thought, well, okay, cool, that's something. It has a conception of what colors are in programming. That's a good starting place. So I thought, what can I do with that? Based on a simple mathematical concept of colors in programming, what can I do from there? Which actually reminded me of my own app, Sense. Now, I wrote the Sense mood tracking app a couple years ago, and it's a way to track how you're feeling that uses text as the least important aspect of how you're feeling. The first thing it does is asks, just generally, how are you feeling from a sad, meh, alright, and then an intensity, and what's a color that explains how you're feeling. The idea behind Sense was that if you're really frustrated, if you're upset, trying to explain yourself, why are you upset right now? A lot of times, the part of your brain that is upset is busy. There's traffic in that lobe of your brain. So if you stop trying to query your language center and start querying your visual cortex, coming up with something, then it's at least a different part of your brain that lets it express itself. And it's actually a really good way to feel heard when you're kind of going through something but you don't know how to express through words what you're feeling. And I thought, well, that's, a way to address a frustration of not being able to linguistically express what's going on through color. Let's try that here. And so I figured that the text chat was a simple enough thing to build. OpenAI, the completions endpoint, where you frame the conversation. This is who I want to talk with. Here's a sentiment from me. Here's a sentiment from them. Go ahead and complete this conversation. That's how the completions endpoint works. That's how this chat works. So it starts with, this is Mosada, your AI friend. Mosada's cool. And so it sends hey, how's it going, friend? I'm doing well. Then it waits for your input. So now Mosada has kind of a concept of how the back and forth of conversation should go. And it'll have a chat with it. That's how the Playground demo project on the OpenAI website works. And so I rewrote that. I decided to write the whole thing in Flutter, because I'm learning Flutter, and I thought that'd be a fun project. The idea was to incorporate art. Going back to the color project, I thought, let's, how am I going to incorporate color into a text chat? And I thought, for Sense, just picking a color that feels like however you're feeling, that's a pretty good way of expressing yourself and feel like expression is art or can be art. I mean, going from, the abstract painters of the day, if you look at Mark Rothko or even Damien Hirst's color gumball things, it's all just individual colors can be art and expression, and I believe that. Just anecdotally, paintings of my own that are just individual color thing. I believe that colors can be art, just in themselves. So with colors being art, I decided, let's try that. In the completions endpoint, one of the examples they even had on their OpenAI website was how to get what would be a background color. So, after deciding to incorporate color as a way to highlight or to embellish the text in the chat, I thought, great, that's a good idea. Let's run with this. This is doable. So what I did is, in the text chat, every time it receives any input, it takes that text input from either yourself or the response from OpenAI. How are you today? What is a color that feels like, how are you today? I'm feeling fine. What is a color that feels like, I'm feeling fine? And so for every request, it makes another request to get the color. It then embellishes the color of that chat bubble with that color. That was the first kind of attempt at something like this. And it was actually got it working pretty quickly, and it was really fun. And so that's the main crux of the idea. That it is a text chat that uses color as an additional meta layer OpenAI express itself. Even if it doesn't recognize that it is expressing itself, it is still generating a color based on whatever it decides at the moment is a color that represents this string. So a lot of times I'll say, oh, how are you today? And it will say some variant of I'm fine, thank you. Most of the time, I'm fine, thank you comes back as either just like a mid-grade, like a 75% opacity white. That's cool. Sometimes it's bright red. Okay, also very cool. Sometimes it's just neon green. That's also very cool. And the neat things that I've learned, or one of the coolest things that I've learned from this experience, has been how the colors don't really correspond with preconceptions of what colors should be. Like red, it's not trying to throw the color of blood or rage at me on the red, green, blue, or an RGBA number, numeric representation of color. Red is just FF0000. It's just like, yeah, here's a bunch of first, and I don't care about the rest of them. If that's something, like that's a valid color combination that mathematically looks different than red is the color of rage, or red is the color of lust, or red is the color of violence, or red is the color of passion. It's like none of those notions that we have color or taint the AI's concept of these colors. That's one of the things that was just the most fascinating through this whole process, is being able to kind of see through back and forth how it actually feels, even if it doesn't realize that it feels that way. And I use the word feels, very air quotey here, just whatever it decides in the moment that is appropriate color for that statement, which I would assume that it's building some kind of chart correlating responses with colors, but that's where the AI, again, surprised me. A lot of times the colors that were returned would vary with the same response. So when I'd say, how are you? It'd say, I'm fine, thank you. I'm fine, thank you has been many different colors. And that's been one of the most fascinating things of this project.